I mean, I would hope that if I were a student of Dr. Peterson, that he would refer to me as she and wouldn't have a problem with that. But at the end of the day, you know, a personal pronoun preference still is a preference for what language other people use. And at the end of the day, I don't have ultimate control over what Dr. Peterson, what the language he chooses to use, or anybody else for that matters. That's up to them.
Okay, let me find out then.
Arises,
let me find out. If she were a student of yours, what would you call her?
She.
You would. Okay. We've established that.
Why do you think it is that so much of what you say is so very popular with the alt-right?
It isn't. And you don't have any evidence for that at all. More than the evidence that alt-right people watch this show.
Neo-Nite website, Savior of Western Civilization.
Oh, well, that was all taken apart today by a number of Jewish publications, by the way, showing that, first of all, that was all satirical commentary on the part of the alt-right, directed at taking me down, for example. And there was an alt-right article yesterday published saying that I was a Jewish stooge and shill. So this is absolute nonsense, and I don't appeal primarily to the alt-right. There's no evidence for that at all. It's the proclivity.
I never said primarily, Jordan. What I'm interested in is why you think that you get the reaction that you do from the alt-right. Looking at the Cathy Newman documentary.
What reaction?
Interview.
There's 10 million people watched that and commented on it.
I'm talking about what I saw, and I'm curious to know what your reaction was to the glee with which the alt-right seized upon that interview.
I don't accept.
Should we deal with the death threats? I mean, she had, I think, a dozen
I don't accept
death
the
threats.
concept that it was the alt-right that was doing this. There were 10 million people who commented on that video, and about 95% of them commented negatively on Cathy Newman's behavior. You think there's 10 million alt-right trolls watching that?
Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. Like you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable.
Well, I'm very glad I put you on the spot. Well, I'm very glad that I have exercised my freedom of speech.
You get my point. It's like you're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on. And that is what you should do. But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me. And that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
So you haven't sat there and... I'm just trying to work that out. I mean...
Ha, gotcha.
You have got me. I'm trying to work that through in my head.
The great American philosopher Beyonce Knowles said that it has been said that racism is so American that if you challenge racism, you look like you're challenging America. We are challenging inequality. We are challenging the refusal to see me as an individual. When we overcome that, have at it, we're all on equal plane.
I think it's fine. I think it's good. The pot is getting stirred here.
I've got a couple of questions.
So let's your side spoke, so I'm going to go to Jordan, then to you,
Let's
Michelle.
assume for a moment that I've benefited from my white privilege. Okay, so let's assume that. That's fine.
Assumption.
That's what you would say. So, so let's say, here, let's get precise about this, okay?
Was that very individual of you?
Let's get precise about this, okay?
Let's get precise.
To what degree is my present level of attainment or achievement a consequence of my white privilege? And I don't mean sort of. I mean, do you mean 5%? Do you mean 15%? Do you mean 25%? Do you mean 75%? And what do you propose I do about it? How about a tax? How about a tax that's like specialized for me so that I can account for my damn privilege, so that I can stop hearing about it? Now, let's get precise about one other thing, okay? We'll get precise about one other thing.
Precise?
Yeah, precise, yes. And so, if we can agree, and we haven't, that the left can go too far, which it clearly can, then how would my worthy opponents precisely define when the left that they stand for has gone too far? You didn't like equity, equality of outcome. I think that's a great marker. But if you have a better suggestion and won't sidestep the question, so let's figure out how I can dispense with my white privilege, and so that you can tell me when the left has gone too far, since they clearly can. And that's what this debate is about political correctness. It's about the left going too far. And I think it's gone too far in many ways. And I'd like to figure out exactly how and when, so the reasonable left could make its ascendance again, and we could quit all this nonsense.
When you talk about, feminizing men, it almost sounds derogatory. It's almost as if you're saying that to be feminine or to express any sort of femininity is actually inferior to masculinity. And I think that is a huge problem even within the language that we use. When you say, don't be such a girl, don't be such a pussy, the greatest insults that men can give each other tend to have feminine origins, like, as I said, pussy or faggot, or anything like that. And I think, again, that speaks to a very systematic inequality between the genders.
And you attributed the rates of mental illness among men to their inability to express, say, sentimental emotions. And I don't think there's a shred of clinical evidence to support that stance.
Sorry.
No. Well, I don't think there's a shred of evidence to support that stance. The kind of violence, for example, that Lawrence is discussing is a consequence of competitive violence among young men.
I think there is some evidence that men find it difficult to talk about things, and that
and they also
ways
find
in
it
which you can help young
out.
men to talk about things.
And that's the evidence for the differential rates of mental health
and
suffering.
I also don't think when you're talking about things being so innate. Judith Butler would have said that, gender is a construct, that gender is a performance.
Well, Judith Butler doesn't know what she's talking about in the least, so I don't accept that.
That's interesting, but
she's no scientist, she doesn't know the psychological literature.
And there's not a secular humanist organization or country on the planet that has ever produced as a good thing, an intentional good thing, rapists and murderers. So,
well, that's highly debatable. That's highly debatable.
Actually, it's absolutely true, because there's never been a secular humanist government on the planet.
I don't know. I think the Soviets were pretty secular.
No,
humanist.
Then,
I know
with all due apologies, you do not know the first thing about what secular humanism is. You should read the Secular Humanist Manifestos, because what happened in Russia and communist countries was an institution of a religious-like structure centered around an individual and forced atheism, none of which is consistent with humanism.
And this is all under the influence, you say, of postmodernism and neo-Marxism.
Yeah,
but aren't those things two separate things?
They're completely separate. And this is something I've been criticized for. Dr. Peterson doesn't understand the difference between neo-Marxism and postmodernism. It's like, I understand the difference perfectly well. It isn't me that's conflating them. It turns out that the people who push postmodern doctrines in the university almost always ally themselves with a Marxist viewpoint. And that is logically incoherent. But I would say the postmodernists really don't give a damn for logical coherence, because they regard that as part of the oppressive, patriarchal, Eurocentric view of the world. The idea that there's an objective reality and all of that, and that you can deal with it with logic. You accept this oppression narrative without question. 120 years ago...
I don't accept anything without question. I'm just telling you a fact.
That's not a fact.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Women were expected to stay home and take care of the kids and cook a meal. That's
Women didn't have reliable birth control until 1960. Don't you think that played a role? Don't you think the fact that they didn't have reliable care for their menstrual cycles?
Are you blaming women for not being allowed to lead countries, to lead nations? Because they didn't.
They were allowed to lead nations. There were queens in many countries. I think you have no idea how much this oppression narrative has saturated your thinking.
Your background. It's pretty earthy, but how did you connect that with your current political perspective? You said that you became disillusioned with socialism.
I became disillusioned with ideology,
With ideology in general.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's certainly not something that's changed. I see very little of the pursuit of justice characterizing the modern university. I see a tremendous amount of the pursuit of vengeance for things that don't even deserve to have vengeance extracted for them.
So give me an example of what doesn't deserve vengeance.
How about the existence of the patriarchy?
But you don't mean now that women have not suffered injustices. In Britain, Virginia Woolf couldn't go to university, or rather she couldn't get a degree. Women have been excluded in all kinds of ways from social situations, have they not?
Yes, but people have been excluded from social situations in all kinds of ways. And I don't like the narrative, the social historical injustice narrative as a way of looking at the world.
the way that young people now are taught about the relationships between men and women throughout history is that the fundamental narrative is that men oppressed women throughout the course of history. And then that kind of came to an end when everybody woke up in 1964.
No.
Yeah, really, that's really it.
No, listen, I don't know what it's like in Canadian universities, but that's what I call, and forgive this European reference, that's a kind of Punch and Judy way of seeing it. That is not how universities as a whole operate.
Well, that's how they operate in Canada. We had the biggest scandal in Canadian university history last year when a graduate student was hauled in front of a Maoist inquisition for daring to show a 5-minute video of me discussing issues like this on public television. The universities are in far worse shape. Maybe they're not in such bad shape in the UK as they are in North America, but they're in plenty bad shape in North America.
Forgive me, and I'm sorry you were involved, but that is not the biggest scandal. The biggest scandal will be the number, for instance, of suicides that are prevalent amongst undergraduates. The fact that one academic was hauled up, in my view, inappropriately for doing what was done is not the biggest scandal. You're inflating
It's
things.
not the biggest tragedy.
But
the
it's the
suicides are a
biggest
bigger tragedy, but it was certainly the biggest scandal. Canadian universities don't make international news.
Peterson, do you have any comments on the Nazi presence at your protest? The presence of Nazis and white supremacists assaulting people at your protest. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I don't like Nazis.